They called him a ghost of the frontier, a man who stepped out of the shadows of slavery to become the most feared lawman the West had ever seen. His name was Bass Reeves. Imagine a man who could track footprints through stone, who spoke the languages of native tribes as if born among them, who could ride for days without rest, and who could draw his gun faster than a rattlesnake's strike. In a land where justice was bought and sold, he became the law itself. But this wasn't supposed to happen. Bass Reeves wasn't supposed to survive slavery, wasn't supposed to outgun outlaws, wasn't supposed to rewrite the rules of the Wild West, and yet here we are, more than a century later, still whispering his name. This story isn't just about a sheriff with a badge, it's about a man who defied a nation built to hold him down. And tonight, you'll find out why history's most legendary lawman may not have worn a white hat, but his shadow was larger than all the myths put together. The year is 1838. America is tearing itself apart. The Civil War has not yet come, but the seeds of hatred and division are already in the soil. In Arkansas, on a small farm owned by a white man named William Reeves, a child is born into chains. His name, Bass. From his first breath, the world told him what he could never be. Never free, never powerful, never respected. But the West was changing. The frontier was wild, untamed, and brutal. Men killed for gold, for cattle, for land, and in that chaos, the cracks of opportunity appeared. Bass Reeves, once nothing more than property, would find a way through those cracks. He would transform himself into the one thing the frontier feared most, a man with both justice and vengeance riding at his side. The Wild West wasn't just cowboys and saloons. It was a battlefield for survival, and Bass Reeves was about to step into that fire. Bass Reeves was not born free. His earliest memories were not of sunlight or laughter, but of labor, whips, and silence. But fate has a strange way of choosing its champions. When the Civil War broke out, Bass was taken to fight alongside Confederate forces as his master's servant. One night, after a heated card game turned violent, Bass struck his master. That single act of rebellion could have meant his death. Instead, it became his rebirth. Bass fled into the darkness, escaping into Indian Territory, modern-day Oklahoma. There, among the Cherokee, Creek, and Seminole, he learned skills that would set him apart from any lawman of his time. He mastered the wilderness, learned to speak native tongues fluently, studied their ways of hunting, tracking, and survival. By the time the war ended, Bass Reeves was not the same man who had once worn chains. He was a ghost forged by fire, a man who could vanish into the land itself, a shadow waiting for the right moment to strike. So here's the question we have to ask ourselves. How does a man born into slavery rise to become one of the most feared and respected lawmen in American history? Bass Reeves arrested more than 3,000 outlaws, killed 14 men in gunfights, and never once was wounded. He was said to be the inspiration behind the Lone Ranger, yet his name rarely makes it into history books. Why? Was it because he was black in an era that refused to see him as a hero? Or because his story was simply too powerful, too dangerous for the myths of the West to contain? As we dive into this tale, I want you to think about something. If Bass Reeves had been white, would we all know his name today? By the end of this video, you decide, was he just a lawman or the greatest American hero you've never heard of? When Bass Reeves vanished into Indian Territory, many believed he would never survive. Escaped slaves often met death in the wilderness, hunted, starved, or betrayed. But Bass was different. In the lands of the Cherokee, Creek, and Seminole, he didn't just survive, he thrived. He became a student of the frontier itself. He learned how to track deer for miles across barren plains, how to hear danger in the silence of the woods, how to vanish in the night so completely that men swore he had turned into smoke. He mastered the languages of native tribes and earned their trust in ways few outsiders ever could. By the time the Civil War ended, Reeves had shed the skin of a runaway slave. What remained was something far more dangerous to the lawless frontier. A man no longer afraid of death, a man shaped by wilderness, fluent in survival. And soon, the world would know his name. Opportunity came knocking in the most unlikely form. Isaac Parker, the infamous hanging judge of Fort Smith. His marshals needed men to bring law to Indian Territory, one of the most violent, untamed regions in America. Bass Reeves was recruited, and what followed was nothing short of legendary. Picture this, a man who had once worn chains now wearing the star of a deputy U.S. Marshal. Alone, he rode into territories crawling with bandits, horse thieves, and murderers. His job wasn't to survive, his job was to drag outlaws, alive or dead, back to justice. Witnesses swore Reeves could outshoot, outthink, and outlast anyone. His calm demeanor made him terrifying. He wasn't reckless, he was calculated. And when he knocked on your door with a warrant, you didn't laugh. You prayed, because Bass Reeves was not a man to bluff against. The legends began to spread almost instantly. Bass Reeves was said to wear disguises, posing as a beggar, a farmer, even an outlaw himself, just to get close enough to his targets. Outlaws who thought they had the drop on him often discovered too late that he had been watching them all along. In one story, Reeves rode into a camp dressed as a tramp, eating with the very men he was there to arrest. Hours later, he had them all in chains. In another, he tracked a killer across 150 miles of wilderness, alone, without food or water. By the time Reeves returned, exhausted and battered, he still had the outlaw alive and bound. The West had seen many sheriffs and marshals, but none like this. Bass Reeves didn't just enforce the law, he embodied it. Think about it. A man born as property of another human being was now holding the power to decide life and death over the most dangerous men of the frontier. Reeves's reputation was ironclad. He stood over 6 feet tall, carried himself like a soldier, and spoke with a slow, steady confidence that cut through the noise of any room. Outlaws whispered his name around campfires. Mothers used it as a warning to children. He had become more than a man. He was a symbol. To the oppressed, he was proof that chains could be broken. To criminals, he was the nightmare in the dark. The rise of Bass Reeves wasn't just about law enforcement. It was about transformation. America was still tearing itself apart. But in the chaos, Reeves carved out a truth that no one could deny. Justice wears no color. And if you were guilty, Bass Reeves would find you. The sky cracked with the first gunshot. Reeves didn't flinch. His horse reared back as dust exploded around him, bullets hissing past his head like angry hornets. He slid from the saddle in one motion, hitting the ground hard, his revolver already in hand. The outlaws thought they had him cornered, but Reeves wasn't prey. He was the predator. He fired back. Boom! The first outlaw dropped screaming. Boom! Another spun from his saddle, blood spraying into the dirt. The air filled with smoke and chaos, but Reeves's eyes stayed cold, unblinking. He moved like a machine of war, rolling behind cover, firing, reloading, never wasting a single round. "Kill him!" the gang leader bellowed. A dozen rifles roared in answer. Lead tore through the air, shattering rocks, chewing trees into splinters. Reeves crouched low, teeth gritted, waiting. Then he sprang forward, charging headlong into the storm. He fired point blank into a rider's chest. Crack! Blood sprayed the man's coat as he toppled from his horse. Reeves spun, pistol whipping another outlaw across the jaw so hard the man's skull cracked like dry wood. He grabbed a fallen Winchester from the dirt, pumping shot after shot into the mob. Outlaws screamed, clutching their wounds. Horses panicked. Smoke and fire swallowed the air. Reeves wasn't surviving. He was dominating. The gang leader cursed, veins bulging as he drew both pistols. He charged, screaming. Reeves didn't back down. He sprinted forward, closing the distance, their guns blazing in a deadly symphony. Bullets ripped past Reeves's coat, one grazing his arm, another slamming into his hat. But he didn't stop. At 10 paces, Reeves dove into the dirt, sliding on his shoulder, both guns firing upward in a furious crossfire. Blam! Blam! The leader's pistols spun from his hands as hot lead ripped through his arm. He howled in pain. Reeves rolled back to his feet, reloading with lightning speed, eyes locked on the last survivors. The outlaws froze. They weren't looking at a man. They were staring at a storm of iron and fire. By dusk, the field was a graveyard. Smoke curled from broken rifles, blood soaked the ground, and silence hung heavy. Reeves stood tall, chest heaving, his revolver still smoking in his grip. Only the gang leader remained, crawling backward in the dirt, eyes wide with terror. Reeves strode toward him, slow, deliberate, like death itself. He pressed the barrel of his Colt to the man's forehead. Then, instead of pulling the trigger, Reeves lowered the gun and growled, "You don't get to die easy. You're gonna face justice." The outlaw sobbed as Reeves shackled him. Behind them, the townsfolk who had been watching from the hills erupted in cheers and tears. Reeves didn't just win a gunfight, he turned fear into fire. He proved the West wasn't ruled by terror anymore, it was ruled by justice. The dust hadn't even settled when Bass Reeves hauled the outlaw to his feet. Shackles clicked shut, cold iron biting into bloody wrists. Men like him thought they could outrun the law. They thought violence and terror made them untouchable. Reeves proved them wrong, but justice didn't stop at the trigger. Reeves knew killing was easy. Dragging a man alive to face a jury, that was harder. That was justice. He rode back into town, with prisoners trailing behind like broken dogs. Townsfolk poured into the streets, their cheers echoing against wooden walls. They didn't just see a marshal, they saw a reckoning. Children pointed, whispering his name. Mothers held their kids close, eyes wide with awe. Reeves was more than a man. He was proof that justice had a face, and that face didn't care about color, creed, or wealth. Every outlaw Reeves dragged in alive told the same story. No matter how far you ran, Bass Reeves would find you. But Reeves wasn't just enforcing laws, he was rewriting what justice meant in the Wild West. Picture the saloon, thick with cigar smoke, gamblers and drunks laughing as a wanted man strutted inside like he owned the place. Then the door creaked open and everything stopped. Reeves stepped in, towering, calm, hat brim low, badge glinting on his chest. The outlaw's grin evaporated. Guns twitched nervously in their holsters. Reeves' voice cut through the silence, deep and steady. "You're coming with me. Alive." The outlaw spat on the floor, cursed, even reached for steel. Reeves didn't flinch. He didn't blink. One move and the outlaw's wrist was snapped, his gun clattering to the ground. Shackles followed. The crowd gasped, not just at the takedown, but at the truth it carried. Reeves wasn't hunting men out of hatred. He was showing the West that law wasn't a rumor. It was real, and it had teeth. Word of Reeves spread like wildfire. Outlaws whispered his name like a curse. They called him relentless, merciless, unstoppable. But his true weapon wasn't his revolver. It was his code. Reeves arrested more than 3,000 men in his lifetime, many of them killers, thieves, or traitors. And most of them walked into courtrooms alive. He didn't kill because it was easy. He killed only when he had to. That's what made him terrifying. Outlaws realized Bass Reeves didn't chase them for vengeance. He chased them because justice demanded it. Picture him riding into Fort Smith, prisoners chained behind, their faces hollow with fear. Judge Isaac Parker, the hanging judge, nodded as Reeves delivered them. And every time Reeves handed over another criminal, the West shifted just a little more. He was carving law into chaos, one arrest at a time. By now, Reeves was more than a deputy. He was a legend. But legends weren't forged in silence. They were etched in the cries of men dragged to justice. He had faced lynch mobs, bloodthirsty killers, even assassination attempts. None of it broke him. One night, a captured outlaw sneered, "You think you're the law?" Reeves stared him down, eyes cold as steel. "I don't think," he said. "I know." The outlaw's laughter died in his throat. Bass Reeves showed the world that true justice didn't wear a crown. It didn't come from wealth or power. It came from grit, from standing when no one else would, from staring chaos in the face and refusing to blink. Reeves was a reminder that the Wild West wasn't just about survival, it was about order, carved out of blood and dust by a man who refused to bow.
Bass Reeves wasn't just a lawman of his time, he was a prophecy. The men he arrested were long gone, the bullets he fired buried in dust, but his shadow stretched across generations. In taverns and front porches, people whispered his name like he was carved from legend. Reeves got him, they'd say, shaking their heads at another outlaw dragged in alive. But over time, those whispers turned into something else. They became stories, stories that fathers told sons, stories that echoed into classrooms, stories that shaped what justice meant in America. And here's the twist the history books didn't want to shout. When Hollywood dreamed up the Lone Ranger, a masked rider of justice, relentless, righteous, it wasn't fiction, it was Bass Reeves in disguise. The silver bullets, the unshakable code, the fearless hunt. Reeves lived it before it was stolen by white storytellers. He wasn't just a marshal, he was the template for America's greatest myth. Bass Reeves' legacy wasn't ink on paper, it was fire. It burned into the soul of a country that didn't want to admit a black man had been the real hero all along. But legends don't stay buried forever. Today, when you ride through Oklahoma or Arkansas, you can still trace the roads Reeves rode, the courthouses where he delivered killers, the cells where men trembled because they'd been caught by him, and the more you look, the more you see. His story didn't vanish. It was hidden. Hidden because it shattered the lie that justice was only white, that honor and law belonged only to one face. Bass Reeves proved them wrong, again and again. He showed that the badge didn't ask about skin color, it asked about courage, it asked about grit. And when America tried to erase him, his legend refused to die. Because you can bury a man, but you can't bury truth. That truth became a mirror for future generations. Black soldiers in World War II, civil rights leaders in the 60s, even today's lawmen and women. When they stood against impossible odds, they weren't just standing alone, they were walking in Reeves' shadow. Think about this, Bass Reeves arrested over 3,000 criminals and killed only when the fight left him no choice. He was a storm, yes, but a storm with rules. That's why his story still cuts deep. Because we're not just talking about a gunfighter, we're talking about a man who dragged the West into order with nothing but a badge, a Bible, and a will stronger than steel. And yet, for decades, his story was left in footnotes, erased from classrooms, ignored by Hollywood. Why? because the truth was inconvenient. A black man, the greatest lawman the West ever saw, that didn't fit the script, but history has cracks, and through those cracks, light breaks through. Today, scholars, filmmakers, and storytellers are reclaiming Reeves. And in that reclamation, we don't just see the past, we see the fight to own our future. Bass Reeves isn't just history, he's justice resurrected. And here's the part that matters most. Bass Reeves didn't live for fame, he lived for the oath. He died in 1910, long before the nation truly honored his name. But his spirit outlived him. It survived every lie, every omission, every attempt to silence the truth. Now, when we speak his name, we don't just honor a marshal. We honor every dreamer who was told they couldn't, every fighter who stood when the world tried to break them. Bass Reeves' legacy is simple but unshakable. Justice isn't about power. It isn't about skin. It's about courage, when courage costs everything. So the question is, what will you do with his story? Will you let it fade again into silence, or will you carry it forward, louder, bolder, burning brighter than ever before? Bass Reeves' story isn't just about the Old West, it's about the soul of America. For too long, history books painted the West as a white man's playground. Cowboys, lawmen, outlaws, all the same face, but the truth wore a different skin. The truth rode with Reeves. Every time he strapped on his badge, he shattered the lie that black men couldn't stand as symbols of justice. Every outlaw he dragged in alive wasn't just another victory. It was a statement, a warning, a promise. And when you think about it, his legacy asks us one question. What kind of courage are you willing to carry? Reeves didn't wait for permission. He didn't wait for applause. He carved justice out of chaos because it needed to be done. No excuses, no hesitation. So now, the torch is in our hands. Will we let his story fade again, buried under lies and silence? Or will we roar it loud, so the world remembers the black lawman who made legends bleed? The West loved its myths. It gave us cowboys who never existed, gunfighters who never won a duel, lawmen who never earned their names. But the greatest story of all wasn't myth, it was Bass Reeves. He wasn't a ghost, he wasn't a movie hero. He was flesh and blood, scars and grit, faith and fire. He stood when others broke. He lived a code that even Hollywood couldn't improve on. And here's the thing. Reeves' fight didn't end when he died. It lives in the struggle for truth, for justice, for recognition. Every time a lie about history gets torn down, every time a hidden hero's name is spoken aloud, Reeves rises again. He reminds us that heroism isn't polished. It's raw, it's bloody, it's costly, and that's why it matters. So what will you do? Keep swallowing the myths? Or stand with the truth that was written in Gunsmoke and Courage by Bass Reeves himself? Picture this, a man born into chains who escaped, who turned his back on fear and rode straight into the storm. That was Bass Reeves. From slavery to US Marshal, he proved the West wasn't just wild. It was wide open for those brave enough to claim it. And yet, history tried to bury him, tried to erase him, tried to hand his victories to men who never lived them. But legends like Reeves can't be killed. They survive in whispers, in records, in the blood memory of a people who know the truth. He was more than a lawman. He was a challenge to America itself, a challenge to stop lying about its heroes, a challenge to admit that courage and justice don't belong to one color. And now that challenge is yours. When you share his story, you're not just talking about the past, you're reshaping the future. You're declaring that no hero will ever be erased again. So let's end with this. Bass Reeves never asked for statues, never asked for books, never asked for fame. All he asked for was the courage to do his job, no matter the cost. But if we forget him, if we let his name slip into silence again, then we fail that courage. We fail the truth. That's why we tell his story. That's why we speak his name. Because Bass Reeves was more than the first black deputy marshal west of the Mississippi. He was proof that strength can rise from chains. Proof that justice can wear a black face. Proof that legends are real and sometimes they ride in plain sight. And now, the question is yours. When the world tries to silence truth, will you stay quiet or will you be the one to raise your voice?